Well, hello and welcome. This is the Social Leader Podcast, made for entrepreneurs, volunteers, business owners, faith leaders, community advocates, trailblazers, innovators, visioneers from every walk of life. Social leaders strive to move beyond basic charity to integrate and then operationalize their social priorities. They forge sustainable solutions to solve our community's most tangled problems. Social leaders have a social venturing mindset, meaning they crave the entrepreneurial adventure of creating a return on investment at the same time as generating a social return on investment. They are bias aware, trauma informed, flexible, available, teachable, collaborative co-creators, active listeners, quick to acknowledge their wrongs, and they seek shared value. They're generous in their time and their spirit. They are meaningfully engaged in the pursuit of diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially when no one is watching. Social leaders, my friends, they are the most creative and important leaders of our time because they are striving to lead with greater social impact to change our world. Welcome to episode number 16 of the Social Leader Podcast. I'm Father Justin Mathews. And real quick, before we begin today's episode, I want to let you know that this podcast is presented by Reconciliation Services, which is a nonprofit social venture in Kansas City working to cultivate a community seeking racial and economic reconciliation to reveal the strength of all. You can find out more about Reconciliation Services programs and even support our work at rs3101.org. I am excited to welcome today our special guest, the CEO of Evergy, the big utility company here in Kansas City, Missouri, and in the region, if you're not watching from here. And my guest is Terry Bassham. Terry, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Father, for having me, and thank you for all you do and all Reconciliation Services does for our community.
Absolutely. And thank you for making time. I know there's a lot happening right now, and I want to just begin by allowing you to introduce yourself a little bit to the community who might not have met you before. You know, your work at Evergy, I know you've been there a number of years, even before you became the CEO, but you know, as a leader who's making a great impact in the region, I'd love to know a little bit more about your journey, your leadership journey, and how you got to where you are today. So help catch us up a little bit. Where are you from and how'd you get here?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I grew up in a small town of 500 people in East Texas. Went to school there and in San Antonio ultimately, and ended up in El Paso, Texas for 20 years first as an attorney representing the El Paso Electric Company, and then went to work for El Paso Electric. After 20 years there, came to Kansas City in 2015, or 2005, I'm sorry. Luckily in El Paso, I met my wife. My wife is Mexican-American, grew up in West Texas, and we met there in El Paso and had 3 children. So in 2005, moved our 3 children here and have been with Kansas City Power and Light, or now Evergy, ever since. And certainly my leadership style has been developed over time, originally based on, my faith and belief that comes from a family that was the First Baptist Church of Ore City, Texas for many, many years, and then ultimately converted to be Catholic with my wife as we raised our kids.
So your Christmas dinner table is a lot like mine, because my father-in-law is a Southern Baptist preacher, and then I became an Orthodox Christian priest and married his daughter. So I might understand some of that journey with you.
Absolutely.
Well, who do you look up to in leadership? You know, who's really helped form you as a leader, and maybe share a story about how you became the leader you are today and who you look up to.
Yeah. So, I've got a very personal relationship with a gentleman who actually lives in Lawrence, Kansas. So a gentleman that worked at Westar, oddly enough, a funny story, came to El Paso Electric to be our CEO, and actually hired me to be the general counsel at the time. And then ultimately, several years later, he had come back to Westar. And I called him to get advice on, the opportunity here in Kansas City. Important about that, though, is how he led our team. And I'll just tell you that from a community perspective, at the end of a long, tough series of issues for the utility, he spent in his first 5 years bringing our company back to be a community leader and to be focused on the social and equity issues of El Paso. And after only being there 5 years and not being there before that, he became the El Pasoan of the Year. And you couldn't squeeze that out of him if you tried. It was all about team, and that's the way he always presented it. So his humble nature, but his constant focus on people, and the people first concept that drives me every day and our company every day kind of started there. And then you begin to see other things from other people along the way that support or go the other way, and really firmed up how I feel about how I should do my job every day.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that personal connection. I can remember when I was really young, I had a guy who was a retired Fortune 500 CFO guy, and some of the greatest lessons I learned came from him. And I think having that kind of mentorship and that kind of relationship is utterly essential, no matter where you are in leadership, from community volunteer, stay-at-home dad, or CEO of Evergy. I want to jump in because of what's happening. We're seeing a spike in COVID. We're recording this right now, during the time of a worldwide pandemic with COVID-19 and coronavirus. And I know that in many cities across the country, and also here in Kansas City, that a lot of the utility companies put a moratorium on shutoffs because of that. And Evergy suspended disconnects for both residential and business customers when Corona happened. Talk to us a little bit about how you came to that decision, and then where we're going from here, because I believe that moratorium is going to expire in the month of July.
Yeah, so we actually were one of the first utilities in the country to announce our termination or stopping of disconnects while we figure out what was going to happen. As a utility, we only grow and we only benefit if our customers grow and benefit. It's unique to the utility industry, but we in particular truly believe, as our industry does across the country, that focus on the customer first is so important. We knew that people were losing their jobs. We knew that bills, in particular utility bills, were going to be tough. We also know, though, that it's an essential service. You really can't do without electricity. And we're very proud of, whether it's hospitals or whether it's just air conditioning in the summer, how important our service is. And in that regard, we had to be flexible. And so our regulators were very supportive. We appreciated that. And they've been supporting us since then, but now it's industry standard. We are moving back into a time period that, if things continue or do get a little better, then starting later in the month, disconnects may start, but that doesn't mean we will be aggressive, and it doesn't mean that we don't continue to provide our customers with options. So we announced an opportunity for customers to get on payment plans, both near term and long term, and even provide credits if they get on a payment plan to help bring down that bill, so that they don't run into a point where they have to make decisions around the electric bill versus groceries. And so we continue to work with folks to help them figure out how to do that.
Yeah, there's a real confluence of potential difficulty. I mean, you got many, many low-income families that may well be affected by COVID if there is this continued resurgence like we're seeing now all over the country. And it's a lot in the South, but it sure feels like it's headed towards the Midwest. And we run a restaurant, Thelma's Kitchen, here in Kansas City, and I won't be surprised. We just reopened yesterday. I won't be surprised if there's a time where we have to really consider whether or not we need to shut down again. But there's this confluence of the low income, particularly communities of color, who are really suffering under COVID at higher rates than other people in our community, and these folks who are living in lower quality housing stock that have much higher energy bills, which I want to come to in a minute. But then you've got the hottest months of the summer. Maybe August will be the hottest, and COVID's coming back. Do you think there's an opportunity, or maybe say a possibility, that for some folks the shut off moratorium might continue, or is that just impossible in terms of sustainability for Evergy. I mean, what are the opportunities moving forward if it gets worse?
Yeah, nothing's impossible. I mean, again, because it's an essential service, it's better for folks to continue to keep in line with their bills so they don't wind up building a backlog. Having said that, just like we responded to the start of the COVID, we'll continue to look at what needs to be done. We'll continue to provide opportunities to help pay that bill, whether it's LIHEAP or other opportunities to get help to folks. And we'll be very cautious about how we do those kinds of things. So I'm always careful to never say never. And certainly my folks still live back in Texas, and they've certainly seen the rise. And yes, we're all concerned about that, and we're going to be cautious in the way we interact with our customers and our employees. And certainly there could be a situation where we find a new opportunity on how to help people, and we'll continue to do that.
Truth in advertising, and also but just being transparent. Evergy supports reconciliation services and supported us very generously as we got into this COVID crisis financially for nonprofits who found themselves just incredibly strapped, and then so many people unemployed and so much need for assistance. And even though there was utility assistance being put on a moratorium, you actually had people going into COVID that were thousands of dollars buried in that debt. And so their situation kind of starts up again in August or in late July. And so we've been very thankful. At Reconciliation Services, we help to distribute over $1 million, almost $1 million every year in direct client services. And a big piece of that is utilities. And obviously Evergy is a strong partner of ours. So it's important for everybody to know that. But let's talk about low-income families, though, and particularly communities of color. I mentioned this earlier, that low-income families really suffer under this unique energy burden. And low-income households, which in this community in particular, but a lot of, if not all of the urban communities across the United States, are really statistically more people of color and African-American people. They suffer under that utility energy burden more than others. And then that's compounded by the need for weatherization and upgrades to really poor housing stock for renters in many cases. What is Evergy doing, and what is Evergy planning to do to help pull alongside these families who, not just COVID, but they've lost their jobs and a lot of folks just can't keep up? What is Evergy doing in addition to making generous donations to nonprofit organizations like ours?
Yeah, so on the first point, again, we announced just a month or so ago a $2.2 million addition to our giving, if you will, to our communities. That's on top of about $6 million that we provide to our communities every year, specifically related to the impacts of COVID. So we had dollars that went to match our generous employees who we had an internal fundraiser and matched those giving so we could provide additional dollars. We also have been pushing hard to get LIHEAP increased, and we provided $400,000 for several other firms and programs within the city who help low-income customers. On a daily basis, though, we continue to provide and have been providing help to our communities through what we call our Connect Center. So, we find, as with most companies, the majority of people would prefer to do business over the internet and be very efficient about that. But the folks who don't have internet or who need to talk to somebody about their issues, many times it's in the urban core. So as a result, we partnered with our communities to create what we call the Connect Center, which is at the corner of 18th and Vine. And we have folks there when we can open it to help people understand just what you described, that oftentimes the folks who have the stress over a utility bill are not as the most efficient. And so we try to get people to understand where they can be more efficient. We have programs in Missouri in particular called the Missouri Energy Efficiency Investment Act, or MEIA, which provides the ability to provide discounts on light bulbs and thermostats and other programs that would help people be more efficient on the front end, which is not only good for all of our customers, but in their bill particularly, be able to reduce the burden that comes from a bill because of an inefficient home to start with.
Yeah, I think a lot of listeners, if you don't work in the energy sector or at the Connect Center or at a place like Reconciliation Services, might not realize that a lot of people, particularly Latino and African American communities, they can pay up to 3 times more than kind of the American average. And when folks are already living well below the federal poverty line, say, below $25,000 for a family of 4, they want to pay their utility bills, their rent, these things, but they truly can't. But I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that it's not always just your energy bill. I'll share a story with you, and I'd love to know, what are the kind of things that you guys are doing to help these particular cases. There was a woman who came to us, an older African American woman on the east side of Kansas City, who was gainfully employed but made minimum wage, was struggling. And so she actually allowed her daughter and boyfriend to move in with her and just kind of share the rent and try to make life together. And what ended up happening is that she went out of town, I think she was actually sick and went into the hospital for a while. And the daughter didn't pay the utility bills in her name that they were supposed to share. And the utility bill just mounted and mounted and mounted over months that she was in recovery, to the point where literally she had more than 1 or 2 months worth of utility bills compared to her salary, into thousands of dollars. And, she came to Reconciliation Services and we were able to help her catch up. But there's only so many people we can do that for. How does a story like that and a company like Evergy tie into the greater prosperity efforts in Kansas City, or the workforce development efforts in Kansas City? And what role does Evergy play, or can Evergy play, in helping more ships to rise together right now?
So, it all fits together. Our core principle of how we operate our company is we call it people first, and that's an easy thing to say, but it's important to every day be committed to it. And so the way we talk about how we make money for our shareholders, and we're a business owned by investors across the country, but we talk about it in terms of employees, customers, and shareholders. What I mean by that is, if we can provide a great place to work, and we can provide an opportunity for people to make a living and provide for their families, then they provide better customer service. And if we can provide for our customers in a way that their families are healthy and can provide the kind of things that electricity can support in their everyday success, that's how we make money for shareholders. And you have to go in that order. If you turn it around, then you end up focused on the wrong thing first. So as we get to that point where we're dealing with customers like you described, yeah, we see that a lot. We see folks who maybe the account was in somebody else's name, and now they have trouble getting a new service at that location because of it. So we focus, and we have the greatest customer service reps in the world. If you call and talk to our folks, they will be helpful, number one, to find out your situation and understand. Then we'll look and see what we can do first. So we've got payment plans. We announced a COVID payment plan where we actually give you credit on your bill if you agree to enter into a 4-month plan, and then give credit on your next bill after that if you pay off through the 4 months. But then on top of that, sometimes there's just more there than we can do alone. And so there are other agencies that help provide that. I mentioned LIHEAP before, and we have great partnerships with Reconciliation Services and others across the city who we can then connect to help provide opportunities in those situations. And then there are just certain situations where we'll rally our community service troops together and figure out how to help someone who's really in need. And it runs the gamut, that's for sure. But again, we don't really grow, and we don't serve as a strong community partner if our community is not strong. And there are a lot of folks that are suffering right now. That's for sure. I can't hear you, Father.
Sorry about that. So
that's right. I thought it might be me.
No, I think it's my side. Energy is an interesting thing because you have on the one hand these families that are struggling, but at the same time, if you can get them plugged back into the system, whether it be through charitable means or some other policy shift or assistance, they actually become paying customers again, which helps the company. And so your people first, employees, customers, then shareholders is, I think, a really important thing. And in many ways, the energy companies touch every aspect of the social determinants of health. There are people that we know that can't get housing because they're, foreclosed upon because they haven't paid their utility bills, and therefore they end up, getting evicted, and then they can't get another place. So it's this really tangled root. But at the same time, the energy companies don't have massive margins, especially if they're trying to invest as they should in green tech and moving forward. I'd like to just chat real quickly about that environmental stewardship side, because obviously that need to upgrade and weatherize individual homes then also has an environmental translation as we look at the larger kind of systemic system of how energy works. Talk to us about the merger from Evergy and how wind and solar and coal and nuclear kind of play a part in the energy mix and how we're moving forward in the region under your leadership.
Yeah, what most people don't recognize, wouldn't have a reason to, is that our industry, and it's certainly been true for the old KCPL and Westar companies, we haven't had material load growth, revenue growth, if you will, from our base product for 10 years. Since 2008, 2009, when the last crash happened, and then the effects of energy efficiency and those kinds of things, think about a large budget that you have, and over the course of 10 years, while you're increasing salaries and you have increasing costs of your other services, your revenue stream is flat. And so that's driven us to be efficient as possible. And we have, both as a company and as an industry, have done that. We, in part, did our merger for that very reason. Two great local companies could come together and do things more efficiently in a way that helps reduce our overall cost for our customers, while at the same time providing the same kind of services. One of the other keys to that was, and you kind of touched on it, was renewables and our reduction in our emissions. So we were partners with Westar on the nuclear plant, and we both were investing in Western Kansas wind over the last 10 years. The result is today the combined Evergy company provides up to 50% of our energy to our customers that's carbon free. Between nuclear power, which has no carbon emissions, and the wind, we're able to do that on a regular basis. Our coal plants continue to exist from the larger plant perspective, but we're focused on over time being able to retire those as well and continue to be on a path to be that renewable resource, that green, clean resource for our customers over the coming years. And
what do you think the time frame for that is? I mean, in terms of how you're phasing that out, is the current crisis hastening that, or is the current political or economic environment slowing that down? How's that going to work for Evergy and
so
for our region?
We've announced a reduction of 80% by 2050, which is related to the timing of the retirement of those coal plants naturally. But what we're currently working on is how do we retire those earlier, and how do we do that in a responsible way for both our customers and our shareholders. But in the end, we'd like to move considerably faster than that. And I would say that the markets are helping us move forward, if you will, in the sense that clearly environment is important to all of us, and a focus on the renewable and the carbon output of every company in this world is being a focus, and coal plants are a big part of that. They're also a big part of our counties and our state's jobs. We have employees, so we want to do this in a way, again, that's people first. And be very focused on how we can get that done over the coming years, which is not only important to our sustainability of our states, both in Kansas and Missouri, but also for our employees and our jobs and our company long term.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it back to people because ultimately the move towards green tech is as costly as it can be. It's important environmentally, and ultimately environmentally, we're talking about the health and safety of our world and of our families. I want to go back to Evergy's actual fundamental values, and I'm looking at one of the websites that you all have that you guys try to bring key service to those who really count on electricity, which is all of us. But that at Evergy, you really believe, you say, in the inherent value of people and in diversity and inclusion. What do you mean by the inherent value of people? What does that mean to you personally, and how does that translate into your leadership of the company?
Yeah, every day as a business, you have to work to be successful, and from a for-profit business, you have to be profitable and you have to grow. But your strategy for how you do that is the key to that comment you just made. And so ultimately, our people and our company are the reason we're successful. And if you take your eye off that fact, then you're forgetting what really drives success. It ties into diversity and inclusion. It ties into the many things that are being discussed today and seen today. And I would tell you from a personal perspective, the story that I've shared with some folks. And again, I'm married to a Mexican American, my beautiful wife and 3 kids. Basically, my kids are biracial, if you will. But one of the stories I've told is that my mother-in-law, who I think is one of the smartest, people in the world, she has a very heavy accent. She speaks 2 languages, for goodness sake, but she has a heavy accent.
Hmm.
And I've seen people, treat her differently because of her accent, and that'll get a son-in-law fired up. I'm here to tell you. But more importantly, as you go and think about that, you think about people who come to work with their experiences, and so people don't come to work and hang up their personality hat on the wall and then begin to do their accounting work or their work in the power plant. They come with who they are, and all of those experiences and who those people are what make them great employees and make them great people. And so to recognize that and to celebrate that and to be supportive of that is important. And that's what we try to do, is continue to focus and admit when we're wrong, admit when we're not quite getting it right, and continue to work on how to do better. So diversity inclusion at our company has always been a core principle. But about a year ago, we decided we weren't moving fast enough. And as a result, we created a brand new position as a director of diversity and inclusion, and it reports directly to my office. We just didn't feel like it was getting the kind of attention that it should. And so we've been working hard to focus on what we can do better on a daily basis, and hiring, promoting, and supporting all of our employees, whatever their diversity, is what's important. And then that provides, again, a recognition for who our communities are and who our customers are, and helps us understand better how to be helpful to them as well.
Yeah, and I operationalizing those diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities is really key. And so any move that Evergy is making to do that obviously is incredibly important, but especially right now, given the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests, and police brutality, and the things that have been happening or been highlighted recently. Where did Evergy stand on, and where did you come down on the protests that were happening here in the region as well as across the world in the wake of the death of George Floyd and his murder?
Well, we always want to be careful, but at the same time, we want to be focused on people first. So ultimately, I wrote a letter to our employees, and then decided the best thing to do there was post that so that the world could see it as well. And it basically says what I just said, which is that we value people. We value people, who they are and where they are. And we need to have a lot of empathy. The one thing that is maybe the hardest sometimes to do is to be empathetic to people who are different from us. So obviously, living on a border city in El Paso and being married to a Mexican American, I have a lot of empathy towards Hispanic families and Hispanic culture. But maybe some folks don't know that culture as well. certainly understanding and being empathetic to people who would watch a family member be harmed and ultimately killed in broad daylight by a police officer. We've got to have empathy for the fact that that's going to make people mad. And so we've just got to have that empathy and be able to talk about it. And as a company, want our employees to know that we support them, and that we're going to keep talking about this and figuring out how to get it right, and know that it's important not only to us as a group, but for our communities that we serve. Again, if our communities are not healthy, none of us are, neither our families at work or our families at home.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like the experience for you has been also very personal, not only sort of on a corporate leadership level, but being married to a Mexican-American woman and having grown up in El Paso and in Texas. What's your lived experience or your family's lived experience been of the recent political and policy decisions that have been made, and sort of the way that that's impacted the Latinx community in the United States? What's been your experience of that?
Well, and I'll be honest, we're very fortunate. We're very fortunate, and I don't want to suggest that we're not. My family does well because we are a tight-knit group of people, and we love each other, and I have a good job. And so from that perspective, always want to be self-aware. But we also, after living in El Paso and 80% Latin, you have certainly the experiences of seeing folks that work hard every single day and still struggle. And so, without being political, what I've always said is that, lawmakers should, know the people that their laws affect. And so I just would always want to keep that in mind, that in the end, it's all about people. And being fair to those people can be discussed in many, many different ways. So I wouldn't want to debate that. But if people are focused on the effect it has on individuals, then that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I appreciate the perspective that you're bringing. And I know that, in your company statements, you're talking about a commitment to diversity and inclusion, but ultimately that starts with us as social leaders. And I know that CEOs and department leaders and people in general oftentimes feel like they aren't free to speak because of politics or because of shareholders and whatnot. But I think now the putting the statement out is important, but actualizing the priorities in the statement at a personal level, I think, is even more critical. And I don't know if you'll want to go here or not, but I'd be very interested as a social leader, that lived experience for you as being a white man, having grown up in Texas and then marrying a Mexican-American woman. Are there any stories where you felt like you really grew or you really learned something about bias or about culture that you were unaware of? Can you share a little bit about your personal growth journey when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion from your own life experience?
Yeah, so it speaks to the word diversity. If you think for a minute about, you mentioned the dinner table at Christmas. Growing up in a very small rural town in East Texas with parents, in a Southern Baptist church, and then think about being at another dinner table with your new Mexican family in El Paso at a dinner table. Those are two different ways of doing things, and it was such a blessing to be around those people, to see how they care about each other. And so you just don't know any different sometimes. And that's why I encourage people is you don't have to listen to what someone else says about diversity. Just be open to experience it. When you're around those kind of things, I married into it, so it was right there. But it certainly was a growth in the way that you think about people's perspectives. And a lot of folks, feel strongly because of how they grew up, and we need to have the understanding that that's absolutely the right thing, except other people grew up differently. And to think about all the ways that people do things all over the world, they're just many times not right and wrong. They're just different. And man, doesn't that make our place a better place to live? It just makes it a more exciting, vibrant, beautiful world to live in when there's different ways of getting things done. And that's the beauty of the culture. And I've certainly grown to believe that even trying to be a leader of a large organization, it's okay to be a person. And we have to be careful sometimes about saying certain things, but it is super important to be a person. And your learned experiences educate you in that regard, no doubt about it.
Yeah, we have to be careful about saying certain things. We also have to be careful, don't we, about not saying certain things or being afraid to stand up or speak up. I think if there's anything that we as leaders are being challenged on right now, it's not only to be empathetic, like you're saying, and come to appreciate the lived experience of others, but also to be willing to use our power, our privilege, our access to resources, people, companies, processes, or knowledge to be able to really benefit people from every background, but particularly in our community, people of color and the Latinx community notwithstanding. I think that as we kind of wrap up our time together, what I'd love to do is just to learn a little bit from you about how we can grow as social leaders. Do you have a favorite book that you're reading or a favorite resource that you've been digging into that's helping you to grow in these things that we've been talking about today?
No, I haven't been reading anything lately. What I've been doing is, again, trying to meet more people. I have a spot where I've been working from, that's not home. And from in that neighborhood, I'm trying to meet people and try to be part of the neighborhood. And again, learn from those experiences. Every single day, I have an opportunity to work with some of the greatest people in the country at Evergy, and I learn from them every day. And a complicated, difficult, think of the guys that are working power plants and working right now outside in this heat, and then call center folks who are working every day to make sure that they can be responsive to people who need help. And you learn from each one of those. My office is the origination for customer service, so I get some complaints, but man, is it beautiful when I hear somebody thank one of our employees for doing those kind of things. And recognizing how important the team is really where I'm continue to focus on the people at Evergy.
Well, I know you've spent a lot of time working on board service, and we didn't get a chance today to talk about your work with purpose-built communities and the Urban Neighborhood Initiative in Kansas City on the East Side. Is there anything that you want to share with us from that experience or from that listening that you've been doing, or your work with other organizations in Kansas City working with low-income communities? Is there anything that you learned as a leader that really you take away concretely into your daily work that you didn't know beforehand?
This may sound awful simple. And I think there was a time in my career where I had grand illusions of being able to impact large swaths of people and be helpful on a very large policy basis and make a change on a grand scale, maybe. And I will tell you that I personally have found for me, and in this situation, that helping one person, one group of people, one family at a time is really the only way I know how to do it. If that causes more people to be helped, that's great. I certainly work for a great company that has the ability to funnel more dollars to be able to help a grander scale. But in the end, I've come to believe just take them one at a time and try to be helpful and be empathetic and figure out because you can sometimes miss the point if you're trying to change the policy of a whole city, neighborhood. But if you can help one person, that was the whole Kansas City Neighborhood Academy focus for me, is we could help one young child get to the next spot in life to be successful. That's good enough. So that's really the focus for me. It's not as grand as maybe some would be able to do, but it's just about the only way I've figured out how to do it. So
yeah, no, I don't think it's a small thing. I think it's really hard to do. Sometimes I think it's easier to focus on the huge policies, and we forget about the lived experiences of the individuals that are right in front of us, and we actually can make a difference today. So I appreciate you sharing that. Well, lastly, I always end every podcast with this question. There are a lot of people out there who are listening that want to learn to increase their social impact. They want to learn to lead, not just to do well with their company or their projects, but they want to learn how to integrate their social priorities more deeply in their work and move beyond just charity and board service. What 2 or 3 pieces of advice would you give folks who are listening so that they can increase their social impact in their daily leadership in life?
Well, first, I would say that we have a lot of great charitable organizations, Reconciliation Services being one of them. I have served lunch once, and I plan to do many more with your organization. Working with a group of people who are dedicated and organized and have a great focus, it continues to be a great way to really get engaged quickly with folks who already kind of know the needs. The second would be what I just said, which is don't ignore what's right around you, and don't be afraid to be personally involved. And I know everybody has their own family and has their own communities to deal with, and so this can be hard. But I'd say just don't be afraid to help, again, one at a time. And finally, I keep using the word empathy. It is just sometimes so hard to understand how much need there is if you can't be or see the need on the other side. And so being able to be empathetic to someone who maybe on that day looks like they're beyond help may absolutely appreciate something simple or more, and probably come from a situation that may not even be the making of their own. So, again, not being so critical and being a little more empathetic to folks in need will lead you along the path many times that is best for you in terms of helping.
Well, Terry, not many leaders in our community touch as many areas of people's lives when they are leading a business. You touch everything from low-income families and their utility bills and their struggle to survive and succeed, all the way to the environmental impact in our region and the future of green tech and energy. And I appreciate the thoughts that you've shared with us today. I appreciate your empathy and your compassion for those in our community. And I appreciate the energy that you are putting in, and I know will continue to put in, to making your leadership count and helping us all to benefit from the greater social impact that a company like Evergy can make, that extends well beyond just the energy industry, but really into all of our lives and into our communities. So thank you for the time today, Terry, and thank you for spending some time with us on The Social Leader to teach us a little bit about where your heart is and where your company's going. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all the employees of Evergy who have the impact they have. And thank you to Reconciliation Services and you. It's been a pleasure to get to know you, and you guys do a great job. I look forward to working together in the future.
Likewise, thanks so much. Well, hang tight with me real quick while we conclude. Everybody, I wanted to just thank you for being here with us today and spending a little bit of time with us. And before we go, I want to let you know about a brand new e-course that I've been talking about for about a month, and it's getting ready to launch. It's called the Social Leader Essentials. We are in the final production stages of getting it ready to launch, but it is an e-course that I think will really help folks, whether you're a volunteer, a CEO, or you're serving on a board, no matter where you are on the front lines or on the back end of a company or in this community. Everyone has something to learn about becoming more bias aware, about having a social venturing, social entrepreneurial mindset, and actualizing our diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities, our environmental priorities. And we all have an opportunity to grow as social leaders. So do me a favor, if you're interested, please go to thesocialleader.org, answer just a couple questions, and we'll have one of our team reach out to you to see if this course, which is about to launch, is right for you. And lastly, if you like this podcast and you want to help us spread the word, make sure to smash that like button, share it out with your friends on social media, and follow us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So again, thank you for spending some time with us today. I'm Father Justin Mathews. I look forward to seeing you next week on the Social Leader Podcast.
Nathaniel Miles was